Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw a dog's eye in graphite. Now the first thing that I like to do here is make sure that the shape and size of the eye is accurate. So I'll start off with a HB pencil, and here I'm now currently using a 2B just to reinforce the darkest parts of that eyelid. Now the shape and size of the eye is very important. It does adjust the expression of that animal if it's not quite right. So I want to be making sure that I've got the size and shape right before I move on to any other part of the eye. Now depending on the breed that you're drawing, the eyes are going to be very different shapes. So the pug here, they have much more of those larger eye shape given the shape of their skull. So I do want to be making sure that I'm studying that reference photo very closely. Now once I'm happy with that, I can now start working on the iris. Now here, this was actually the reflection of two people in the eye itself, so I want to be making sure that I've captured the general shape of that, but I'm not looking to add in any kind of detail. If you can see the camera where they're holding the arms up and things like that, you're going to only be able to add in a certain amount of that detail. So here I just went for the basic shapes and I've made sure that my contrast is good. So now what I'm starting to do is reinforce the shading, adding more of that darker graphite. And as I continue to layer with my blending stumps or my pencils, this is where I'm always refining my contrast. Now contrast is something that I speak about in all tutorials. It's really important. Without it, the fur, the eye, whatever it might be, is going to look flat and two-dimensional. Now my biggest tip when drawing eyes is you want to be making sure that you've got that sphere shape. So in order to capture that, the shading is very important. You can see that I'm starting to darken up around the outside edge of the iris, and this is helping to make it look like it's that sphere rounded shape rather than a flat surface. Now the shading here is going to be a combination of the pencils and my paper blending stumps. When I use the pencils, I'm using very light pressure to make sure that I don't end up with any scribble movements, and that's going to enable me to get a softness from one value to the next. Now at this stage here, I'm being a little bit more precise because I'm hinting at some of the mid-tone shadows, the patterns within the eye that's in the reflection. Now depending on the size of the portrait, you're not going to be able to add in every single detail. This is only an 8x10 size, so it's quite small, but I'm still able to capture a nice level of detail as long as I make sure that I'm being precise and accurate with those pencils. However, if you're working on a much larger scale, something like a 16x24 inch, then that eye is going to be significantly bigger on that size compared to what I'm drawing here, so you'd be able to add in far more of those finer, more intricate details. So you really do want to zoom into that reference photo and study that more closely. Now here I'm starting to use my softer, darker pencils to reinforce more of that contrast. Now if you've seen many of my videos here on YouTube, you'll know that this is something that I really do focus on because it doesn't matter what it is, the values are so important. If I jump into my darkest details here for the outside shape of the eye, then it's going to still look flat. Even though they're very narrow sections, I've still got 3 or 4 layers here where I'm building those values up gradually. And this will also be the same when I'm working on the pupil. So if that pupil is very dark, I still won't jump in with a 9B pencil, for example. I want to be building that up in stages. Now layers and contrast is something that I do focus my real-time tutorials on Patreon because those two things go hand in hand. We can't capture good contrast if we don't have the right number of layers, and if the number of layers aren't there, then the contrast is going to be lacking. So it's one of those things where we have to be very careful with how we're using those pencils in order to make sure that we don't burnish, so that we can continue to add lots of layers and that we're using the right layer at the right time. Now I've briefly mentioned that about how I don't jump into a dark 9B pencil first. I've built that up into stages, but it would be the same with a highlight. If you've got a really bright reflection in the eye and it looks really bright, then you can allow the white of the paper to show through. You can draw around those highlights if needed. But the wonderful thing about layering in that way with building up the subtlety is you could always come back in with your lighter pencils, a 7H, a 2H, whatever it may be, and darken those highlights up gradually. It can be a very forgiving medium to work with as long as the right layering process is used. Now the putty eraser here, that there is enabling me to remove that graphite but only light layers. So again, this is all going towards those layers of subtlety and making sure that I've got a nice variation with the lights and the darks, but more importantly as well, those midtones. Now the midtone values are often forgotten about because we're already focusing on getting dark shadows and bright highlights. But if we don't have the subtle midtones in, then I do feel that the rest of the portrait overall, not just the eye, the fur, if the midtones aren't included there, then everything does look more flat. You don't have the same degree of depth. Now in all of my Patreon tutorials, I've got a voiceover during every drawing process in the moment. So I'm explaining everything as I'm going along, and I feel that this enables me to explain those decisions that we make in the moment. There might be something where we make a mistake or we do something that we need to fix. Those times there are very valuable, and that's what makes us better artists. So if ever there's a mistake or something that I do just need to change, if I did a pencil stroke that I don't like, I need to maybe adjust how I'm using that pencil to give me a different effect. All of that is included in my Patreon tutorials, because leaving them out, there is no benefit to doing that. Creating or making those mistakes is something that really does help to improve our drawing skills, because knowing how to fix those mistakes are just as important as being able to use the pencils and erasers effectively. Usually we have to make a mistake in order to know how to get the best out of that tool or that supply. And this is something that I've spoken a lot about to some artists recently, about how the fear of creating a mistake will often stop that artist from drawing or painting at all. And obviously that is a real shame. Mistakes happen, they happen all the time, but it's just knowing how to fix them. It gives us that confidence that no matter what we come across in our drawing, we can overcome it. And as I've said, this is something that I do focus on all of my tutorials from start to finish. If there is an effect that I don't like, or I need to do a different method with my pencils or my erasers, I will always make sure that that's included. Now the corner of the eye, this is one of the breeds where it's a little bit more prominent. You won't necessarily see this on some other dog breeds, but if you do see it, it's very important not to rush over it. This is just as important as the eye itself. If we don't get this right, you might potentially end up with an eye that doesn't really look like it's part of the face, which is obviously a real problem. So I want to be focusing on the same fundamentals here, shading, layers and contrast, to make sure that I've got this bit looking just as good as the eye. Now notice as I'm coming in with this mechanical pencil here, how I'm allowing that very narrow white highlight of the paper to show through. Noticing these tiny little highlights in the lower and top parts of the eyelid are going to massively help to build up more of that three-dimensional look. Where that light is catching the eyelids here, this is important, just as important as the main reflections in the eye. Now the last thing I want to mention here is just look at how many stages I've broken this up into. I'm not working on the whole eye in one go. I started off with the outline, the outside shape of the eye, the iris, now I'm working on the outside section. This here is enabling me to not become overwhelmed. So if you do find that that's happening, it might be because you're working on too much of a larger area. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If you would like to draw along to the real-time version of this drawing, then it is available on my Patreon channel now. You get the reference photo, line art and full material list. And as I've mentioned earlier, it is recorded with a voiceover while I'm drawing, so every single process is explained thoroughly. I'll link my Patreon in the description below if it's of interest. And here is a photo of my finished drawing. I do actually have a time-lapse video of this pug as well, so if you want to see how I did tackle through the black fur, then I'll link the pug video in the description as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. If this video was useful, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and a thumbs up, because it makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. I'm going to be uploading another video next week, but in the meantime, if you've got any art related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments below, because I'm more than happy to help if I can. As always, thank you so much for watching.